Hello, everyone. How are we? How's the form? My name is Maurice Brosnan, and this is Arena, our new podcast. And today we're talking about punditry in sport. Before I do that, thanks a million to everybody who got in touch after last week's show. Even a few people I bumped into over the last few days. I actually do genuinely appreciate it. So to recap very quickly, what are we doing here? Arena, it's basically a nod to the history of the paper. There was this very glossy pull-out supplement, a sports writing supplement that the Examiner had long before my time now, but I would have read it as a sports fan. And this is basically in honor of that. The general idea of what I want to do with this podcast is the kind of weekly feature style reflections on Irish sport. So basically, there are stories that I have written over the last few years that I actually felt like would have been better serviced by being podcasts. Just the audio was more powerful, or some of the characters that I interviewed deserve to be heard as much as they deserve to be read. I'll give you an example. About a year ago, I interviewed Wicklow goalkeeper Mark Jackson, who was part of the four who went to the combine to try and make it in the NFL as part of leader kicking. Charlie Smith obviously went on to do very successful things with the New Orleans Saints. But the general tone of what I was talking to Mark was not about the athletic side of it in terms of the kicking. It was about the psychological side of it in terms of the personality tests and the interviews you would do with professional clubs. And Mark was able to tell me about going into this hotel and 20 different clubs. It was like a version of speed dating where he was going along and rapid fire questions about all sorts of things, to the extent where he'd be across the table and the guys at the other side of the table would ask, "Are you the best of the Irish four?" with the other three sitting very close to him. And he obviously would have to say yes. And then they would ask him who was the worst of the four. But in the context of him telling me this story, he was able to mimic the voices that he was hearing and recount in very entertaining detail how exactly that went through. And actually, I might get Mark on the podcast at some stage to tell him that story for itself. The opposite is true too, obviously, by the way. There are certain stories that are too dense and are better served at being written, and I will still do that in my own job as well. But for the purposes of that, the former that I referenced earlier, this is where I want to do that. So today I want to talk about punditry in Irish sport. I arrived in Stothill for the last round of the Allianz Leagues, the last round of the Gaelic Football Championship, or the Gaelic Football League, to hear the incredibly sad news that Michael Lester had passed away. There was some very touching tributes to him and the legacy he'd left, particularly in a GA context, but also in other sports as well. And it got me thinking about the time that he best summarised and why it's remembered so fondly by a lot of people, a lot of sports fans more typically. And I think he obviously represented an era that we remember very fondly. And there is the natural, very intoxicating reality that people just tend to lean towards nostalgia, and that can be part of it too. But I think there's something more, something in terms of the popularity and power of punditry that he represented, which was basically, look, there's no getting away from it. This template was set by RTE. They had a Lister with Spillane and O'Rourke and Brawley, or hurling was a bit more of a rotating cast, but you had the Gerlach Nans and Tomas Mulcahy's, Cyril Farrell's, Liam Sheedy, Donal Ogue. In hurling, you had Hook, Pope and O'Shea. I actually think that template extended elsewhere from RTE. These very powerful force of personality figures like Jerry Kernan in athletics or Mick Dowling in boxing, who were capable of being very entertaining and engaging and captivating the mood more broadly. And this was the nature of the gig, was they were dictating the national mood with a lot of this stuff. It was a one-stop shop, and they delivered it very, very effectively. And that was the style of punditry that became a template for what was coming forward. And there was the godfather of all of this, the man who I think kind of set, in many ways, a template that a lot of other pundits have subsequently tried to follow.
This is a man who actually goes and sees sick children in hospital. This is a family man with 5 children who's a credit to his country and to his family. And I'm not going to listen to him being called a thug by you. I don't want to hear what...
Hang on a second, no, don't misquote me. I said that was written.
Why do you introduce me to this?
Because I'm saying there's an alternative view.
And whose view is it?
That's the view that was...
Whose view is it?
In a column on the Sunday Times.
Which column? By who?
It's on the back page of the Sunday Times last Sunday. Look at it.
And who wrote it?
I can't remember his name.
I'll tell you who wrote it.
Who?
I can remember his name. Rod Little. He's the guy who ran away and left his wife for a young one.
This is one of my favourite clips in Irish sport. I watch it, I want to say weekly, but maybe that's too far. And, you know, it's funny just thinking back on that moment in itself. Part of that is obviously the unbelievable entertainment. And this was a Limerick versus, or Liverpool versus Real Betis Champions League game that they were talking before, but it became a one-stop shop. Everybody was rushing back to hear what they said, and obviously it was nearly more important to the game to a whole host of people for pretty understandable reasons. And I suppose part of that too is just the master that was Bill O'Hurley, and the entire thing is worth watching as much as that one clip, which is obviously reference a whole pile. But there's a very funny moment during it when poor Niall Quinn could have been the legacy of this if it wasn't for the attack on Rod Little at the end of it. But when Liam Brady and Dunphy are having a back and forth, and just off, as they're having this exchange, just off camera, you can hear Bill O laughing, kind of chuckling. It was very interesting insight into just how much he was enjoying the theatre of it all, basically.
To go for a little quid. He went 3.5 million in the end to Manchester United. So we had a clause in his contract. Get your facts right.
Oh, my facts are right on his back.
Not right. I read your book.
Are you going to let me talk?
Well,
Or you want more insults?
No, so get your facts right.
It was phenomenal. It was incredibly entertaining. That entire era was remarkable. It also wasn't perfect, and there is no getting away from that. Some of the stuff could be a bit too personality driven. There would have been a criticism at maybe the lack of tactical analysis or nuance within all of it, and definitely in particular in the context of that RTE football panel, it has become an increasing black stain was the way that they covered the FAI, especially during the pomp of that time. So that is an obvious realm that punditry also needs to factor in for. And I suppose that's kind of what has happened subsequent to that is that you've got I don't know, a couple of different things have happened. Basically, there are more piranhas in the fish tank, so media has fractured and it's become diverse, and that traditional stranglehold, the pulpit that RTE were able to offer, is not there anymore. As well as that, it has become more serious. There's no denying that. There is less entertainment in it. There's a lot more, not necessarily just stats and data, but a lot more talk about setups and this kind of thing, particularly in an Irish context. Curiously enough, the opposite thing has happened across the water. You start to pivot away from that slightly more. But ultimately, you have to ask yourself, what are they trying to serve? And what are the pundits that people admire right now? And I actually didn't even know who were the pundits that people would most admire. Who are the people that people actually like talking to? So I did a quick exercise in the office today where I just asked everybody, just quickly, tell me who your top pundits. Here's what they had to say.
My favourite pundits at the moment would have to be Bernard Jackman on the rugby side. I quite enjoy the insights of former Kilkenny cornerback Paul Murphy on the hurling front. And in terms of Premier League and Champions League, I'll go with Jamie Carragher and Thierry Henry.
The pundits that I like the best in no particular order by sport in Gaelic football, it's Paul Flynn and Peter Canavan. In soccer, I like Kevin Doyle and Lisa Fallon. In rugby, I like Rob Kearney. And in hurling, I like Anthony Daly.
I try not to be too biased with this, given that I'm a Liverpool fan and a Cork man, but I'd say two of my favourite pundits anyway would be Jamie Carragher and Roy Keane, in fairness. Roy Keane, obviously, he's always good for a soundbite, but Jamie Carragher, in fairness, Monday Night Football is some show, and obviously the level of work he does and insight he gives is always very good. Honourable mention as well, in fairness, to Wayne Rooney. I think he's been very good since he's joined the Punditry team and gives a lot of good stories and up for the crack a bit as well, which I kind of like. And then in terms of GA, obviously Patrick Corrigan as well. He's done very well since joining, and Anthony Daly again. So usually in a pundit, what I like is obviously a level of insight from former players that have done really well and won lots of things, and but also up for a bit of a laugh as well as being serious. So
hi Maurice, three favourites right now. Cricket on Sky, Mike Atherton, former England captain. Paul McGinley on the golf with the Masters coming up, always a pleasure to listen to. And our own Donald Lenihan.
When it comes to football punditry, it's still the best in the business. There's Brian Kerr, was great in print, also good in broadcasting for Virgin Media and on the radio. You look to England, probably Wayne Rooney is the one that I would see as the best that you'd listen to for insight and analysis.
I'll do my own list at the very end here. You have to have that entertaining and engaging and the force of personality element within punditry. That is definitely part of it. You also do have to have that other side of it, in my opinion. But ultimately, you want to just appeal to as broad a sample size of people as possible. And given the way media has fractured, I think that's actually no harm. If there are people who want the more diverse stuff, the more nerdy stuff, whatever it may be, there are other places where they'll go and satisfy that. But the job of the pundit is to still talk to the every man or woman, the Joe Soap, who wants that balance. And the best pundits, in my opinion, the people that I enjoy listening to, are the people who are capable of doing all of that. They're capable of being entertaining and also capable of providing insight, and are capable of calling out administrations or beyond that if it comes to it. And also they can have a laugh, they can be empathetic, they can mix themselves, pocket knife pundits basically. If I think about that in an American context, for argument's sake, there's like the Dan Orlovskis or the Mina Kimes of this world who do this stuff very effectively because they have to. This stuff is 24/7, sport is all encompassing there. And gradually the same thing is happening here. We're starting to see this all-consuming part of sport and how there's a whole host of different audiences, and the job of a lot of people is trying to satisfy as many of them as they do at one time. So if I boil this down, I think what we're looking for our pundits is still that element of an appeal to as many people as possible. That is particularly what they want to do, in the context that if you're looking for something else, the people who aren't capable of doing that, who don't have the same charisma or that same comedic value, they can just do their own niche podcast instead. Let's talk to Ruby Walsh. Right, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Ruby Walsh now. Who's your favourite Irish sporting pundit, Ruby?
I don't know if I have a favourite, to tell you the God honest truth. I like anybody that tells me something that I didn't know or I didn't see myself. I watch all sports, so I love and still love watching Michael Johnson on the Athletics. I think he's incredible. But it's things like that. Someone tells me something that I didn't notice, and you see it definitely even with the Tour de France. With, I suppose, Sean Kelly will tell you something you didn't know, or tell you why somebody did something for a reason. But that's what I like in punditry. And look, there are people who would much prefer an opinion, or would much prefer to, I like it explained to me, because I understand that all athletes are humans and humans make mistakes, but I want to know why they made the decision. And if they made a mistake, they make a mistake, but why did you make the decision? Was the decision right? So what if you get it wrong? You're human, you're going to get it wrong. I know that as a former athlete, but that's what I like in punditry anyway.
Do you enjoy doing it?
Do I enjoy doing it? I do enjoy doing it. Then some days are easier than others. There's no doubt about that. I think the better the racing gets, or the better sport gets, the easier it is to do it. I think the further down the grades you go, the harder it can be, because you're comparing apples and oranges. And that's the same in every sport. I mean, can a GAA pundit hold the lads that played last Sunday for Donegal and Kerry to the same standard as the lads who played for Carlow and Longford 3 divisions below them? They can't. So you're watching a different product. And so I get the better it is, the easier it is.
So, full disclosure, the reason I thought of you to ask you for this interview is a couple of years ago I spoke to you about, I was writing a feature at the time about the art of the fall, and it's the idea in horse racing about how do you manage that. And I remember you gave a phenomenal answer at that stage about looking for your feet when you fall, and why actually falls could be worse off good jumpers versus bad jumpers. But I'm kind of curious, that was phenomenal to me, because you're explaining to me a world I know very little about. When you're doing punditry for Cheltenham, are you speaking to the likes of me who are coming to this sport and not living it week to week, or are you trying to speak to the diehards who are looking for that level of insight that you just referenced earlier?
I think it depends on what you're working for. If you're working for ITV or RTE, you are speaking to a bigger or wider audience. So it's a different sort of punditry, really. You're trying to explain things. But to me, I probably don't treat it any differently. They're different shows. When you're working for racing TV, for instance, it has to be more form analytical, because the people watching it are subscribers to a racing only channel. So they tend to know what they're watching. So you're looking at it more towards form. Whereas when you're working on a free-to-air channel and it's a casual viewer, I probably wouldn't go as heavy on the form. I do more replays or try and predict what might happen through tactics. But it is a different challenge, different audiences. You're trying to, I don't know, is it your role to attract a new audience? I don't think so. But it's definitely your job is to try and entertain the people who are watching. Entertain is the wrong word. Inform the people who are watching.
There'll be a lot of people listening to this who aren't horse racing fans, so I'll reference exactly what I'm talking about before I ask you about it. During the Cheltenham Festival earlier this year on Gold Cup Day, Paul Townsend is coming up fourth to last, about to make history on Gaelic Warrior. There's a phenomenal clip of you breaking it down, but as he's approaching the last fence, you're clicking your fingers. And before he jumps the last fence, you say out loud, spot on, and sure enough, he clears it and makes history. What were you doing there?
I didn't even realise I was doing it because actually somebody else asked me the same thing. I just hit on his stride pattern, and I didn't. To me, you watch so much of it, and I was just watching his stride, the distance. You're thinking it's going to be. There was it, and the horse was brilliant because 2 strides back, the horse takes a shorter stride himself. He set himself up. The horse was watching where he was going, changed his feet, and then was spot on for the jump. So I was just clicking with the horse. And he knew before that. He knew when he backed off the second half, the last stride was spot on. Like now, spot on at takeoff doesn't mean you're going to be spot on at landing. Anything can happen in a horse race. I mean, he gets too high behind and gravity wins because he pitches over on his front end. But he was in the right spot to take off. And I was just watching it as much as a fan, as much as anything else. But that's the way I tend to watch racing anyway. But I didn't know I was doing that.
Well, I'm sure it's like any job, isn't it? If you feel like that the blur is there between profession and passion, and you're watching that in the same way that you'd be watching it anyway, you're able to give people the same level of insight. So that's to explain that to people. You're tinkering your tips with the straight of the horse. Basically, you're trying to see if how its approach is coming into that last fence.
Yeah, and because he was on his own, you're only watching one. He's in perfect isolation. If you're trying to watch 2 horses, you're watching to see which one is going better. But as a race, it was pretty much over. All he had to do was jump the last fence. So your vision, your way of looking at it changes to something else. You're then looking at the only danger being the last jump. Whereas if there's 2 horses going side by side, well, it's not just the jump is the danger, it's the opposition too. So you're looking at it a different way. And like, what was it, 15 seconds, maybe less, 10 seconds from the second last to the last? That's a long way in a horse race. I mean, one horse is on his own. To me, it felt like it was going in slow motion.
Do you have to do much prep for that, or is that instinct?
That's instinct. I don't do any prep with that, but I haven't noticed myself doing it in the past. I don't know if I probably wouldn't usually have people with a video on me when I be watching a race anyway, but or a camera on me. But no, prep comes from knowing form, knowing what's running. But that's no different to any sport. I mean, you watch any pundit on any sport on any channel, and if they don't know the players on a team or the opposition, they stick out straight away. So and it's the same with horse racing. If you don't know the product that you're talking about, it sticks out on TV if you haven't done your homework.
Can I ask you, in a situation like the Nico de Bromville and Declan Queally scenario, do you feel like your job in that scenario is to explain to people what exactly happened or to give an opinion on it? Opinion
is all I can give on that, because I wasn't at the start. I didn't hear what Nico said to Declan. I didn't hear what Declan said to Nico. I do think something like that, I can give an opinion on a race or a ride, or why somebody went to the outside when they could have went to the inside, or went to the front when they could have went to the back. That's an opinion. But when you get down to a situation like that between Nico and Declan, where somebody said something and someone reacted, well, if you haven't got the facts, your opinion is useless. So you need to have the facts. Now, I did have a comment on it, but my comment was, what I was trying to say when I was too Irish about it was like that neither of them should have said anything. Put up and sort it out between yourselves. Stop, you can't, you don't come in and cry and give out like that. I mean, they're adults in a grown world. Like what happened at the weekend, Michael Murphy didn't get sent off, but the Kerry player that went down didn't come off the pitch crying because Michael Murphy didn't get sent off. Sometimes there are things happen in sport that you move on. You might get equal or get even somewhere down the line, but you definitely don't cry about it.
I know it's not your style to go castigating fellas or anything like that, but I am curious. The fact that you're giving your opinion and you're commenting on people that you also rub shoulders with, is that ever an awkward relationship?
No, to me, I also think as a pundit or someone working on television, you have to say what you see, whether that is positive or negative. You have to say what you see. Now, I probably, and we're contrary to what some people would say, I wouldn't be that hard on people that wouldn't be going that well or younger people. I think they are a bit different to, well, definitely to professional soccer players or rugby players. I know in the GAA they're all amateurs, but I know in professional soccer, professional rugby, you watch Super Sunday or whatever it is on the Sunday, and it's over, and Gary is and Neville is sitting there with Roy Keane and Jamie Carragher and whoever else is on, and they can tear strips off a player. But regardless of what they say, that lad is still going to get paid next Friday. Whereas if I come on the television with a jockey who is literally riding for pay, he has to be a big enough name that he's still going to be getting the rides next week. If you tear into somebody who's not that well known and not going that well, you could have a huge impact on their ability to earn a living as well. So there is a fine line there with racing that's different maybe from other sports.
And I think a connected part of that is the reality that you have walked the walk. And not that I'm going to talk myself out of a job here. I think people who haven't actually done the sport are still entitled to give their opinion on it. But just to give you an example, I very recently did a piece of analysis where I spoke about the way somebody defended David Clifford in a match. And I was kind of curious why they left him as free as they did. And then somebody else came back to me and pointed out, well, if you look back at that now and think about it, his option there was to let Thomas Sullivan, who's no mean player, to run straight down the middle, or to go to him, or to step back off and accept if he kicks it from outside there, at least he's not in behind me. And this was a guy who'd been in the heat of battle and knew the complications of it. And the fact is that you also have an understanding of that. And in my job, I'd love to be able to bring that level of insight in more. And if people are willing to talk that way, then all the better. But you have actually walked the walk, which I think does equip you slightly better to talk the talk as well.
Yeah, I don't know. It gives you another opinion. Look, I do general sport in the radio on Mondays, and I like to talk and ask questions about it. I don't offer a huge opinion on it unless I can correlate it to something I've done myself. But I think everyone is still entitled to an opinion, and I completely understand that. Everybody watches, becomes a fan. Hey, we were all picking the team for Hamer last week. You know, that's just sport, and that's what drives interest. But I think at times people will say, you're probably too soft, you give people the benefit of the doubt too often. But I do understand how hard it is. And I do understand, I have no problem pointing out where the bigger lads are going wrong, or the bigger names, male or female, are going wrong. Because in my eyes, they're successful enough to take it. And that's not going to have a huge impact on them. And they do in general take it. Not too many have ever said boo to me. But I try to steer away from, or I wouldn't be as harsh on lesser jockeys who I see making mistakes every day of the week. But what I might say to them privately, I don't point it out to them in public.
You referenced the audience idea earlier and whether or not it's your job to bring it. But even that idea that you just hinted at there, which is that maybe a strain of criticism of being too soft, how does that stuff reach you? How do you hear what the audience feel about it, or how they think about your punditry?
I take it from my agent generally, who's all over everything, basically, and producers too. I do think it's. I suppose I worked as a jockey for 20 odd years and got feedback every day about what I'd done, and I do think that is vitally important in radio or television, or I write for the Examiner, even with what you write. If nobody rings you up and says, here, by the way, that was a crap article, and that sentence was wrong, and that sentence didn't make sense. Like before I send mine on, I get them proofread because I wasn't a scholar in school, my articles. But even on television, if a producer or a director doesn't say to you, here, actually, you need to speak slower, you weren't clear enough on that point, I didn't understand what you meant there. If somebody's not pointing it out to you, it's not so much criticism, but you need constructive criticism, I suppose, is what people will call it. But you do need someone pointing out to you what you're doing wrong. Because it's easy to know what you're doing right, but it's what you're doing wrong and how you get better. That to me is the biggest part of it. And I probably would prefer more producers and directors to say to me, no, that wasn't good. That's not great. Watch that back, change that. And I would watch back a lot of the work I do, because that's what I was used to doing as a jockey, that you always have to be trying to get better at what you're doing.
Just finally, there's obviously no denying that you're improved as a jockey as you go on. Do you think you're a better pundit today than you are when you started?
I don't know. I don't know. I hate judging myself. I judge other people and let other people judge me.
Thanks a million, Ruby. Just a quick note to finish on. It's something we kind of touched on earlier. I do think the idea of everything being driven solely by numbers or by appealing to a bigger audience is a dangerous place for media to end up. And look, journalism and punditry are not the same thing, obviously. But with stuff like that, I think similar standards should apply. It can't just be about what performs well or gets the most clicks. I actually think that's what has happened to football punditry, or it explains a lot of it anyway in the last couple of years, because there's no denying a lot of this banter stuff. It does numbers, it does really well. And it's actually just gotten to a point for me personally where there are people or shows I just wouldn't go to if I want to hear about important issues. And I suppose in a way, we're actually lucky because of that thing I referenced earlier, which is how fragmented media has become. If you want somebody who would provide that depth, you'll probably find them on YouTube or podcasts or the million different other platforms that exist now. Now, at the same time, earlier when I was thinking about my list of the pundits that I don't have a definitive list or a power rankings or anything like that. But when I think about the pundits that I personally enjoy the most, they have that balance. They have their finger on the pulse. They understand their audience. They're capable of holding powerful organizations or sports to account, talking about serious issues while also breaking down their sport or having a bit of crack. They're that pocket knife ability. And you can't be ignorant of that either. So in rugby, for example, I think of guys like Bernard Jackman or Ronan O'Gara. In the GAA, Infamous Morrison, Anthony Daly. I'll be accused of being very examiner biased in that sense. Sonia O'Sullivan in athletics or Andy Lee in boxing. And you can't be ignorant to that audience idea either. So you do have to have an awareness of it. I'll finish on this. There was a clip shared by RTE last week of Michael Lester touching on something similar. And it kind of gets to the heart of it. There's no point in being the smartest or most interesting or funniest person in a room if no one's willing to listen to you.
We're to be honest with ourselves in television. What we are actually trying to do is to entertain the public. And we will do that entertaining in different ways. It may be bringing important world events. It may be bringing important sports events, other things in our lives. But let's face it, the business that I'm in is the business of television and the business of entertainment. Whether coming along with that is bringing this great game to the wider audience, that's an ancillary. That comes with the territory as well. Of course it does. But really what we want to do is have an audience. What we sit down the couple of days after a Sunday game, after a live match, we're not thinking to ourselves, that was a great game, or gee, we've really promoted hurling here, whatever. Okay, that is part of it. There's a little bit of that about it. What are we doing? We're looking at the audience figures. Were the audience figures as well as they were for the match the previous week? Were the audience figures as good or better than they were on that same weekend last year and the year before? And if they're not, is there a reason for that? If they are, or if they're better, how did we achieve that? And how do we get better again? That's the business television is in, and I'm part of that business. So it's a fascinating, you have a foot in a couple of camps, if you like. But if you were to ask me what I thought about Gaelic games in my life, it's been a very important part of it. But really, I'm a television presenter doing this stuff, and I want people to like it.